we're going to have two different panels. We're going to have the first panel about consumption, and the second will be about production. And so these panels we're kind of moving from the more technical academic perspectives and now into kind of some different points of view of how the future Nordic diets would look like, how they would be implemented in the future. And so with me I have four experts, and unfortunately we had a fifth. She is sick today, so okay, you can hear me fine just with this? Yeah, okay, good. Good. So I'm going to introduce them one by one, like I did before. And so first we have Anna. Richert, and she is a senior. She's a senior expert in food at the World Wildlife Foundation of Sweden, and she has worked extensively with sustainability issues related to the food supply chain. And she's currently involved in the World Wildlife Fund Sweden Meat Guide and the Swedish Sustainable Supply Chain for Food and the Global World Wildlife Fund Food Practice. So in previous lives, she's been a consultant in sustainable sanitation and participated in the creation of a climate certification for food in Sweden. Okay, and we also have here Susanna. She works as a consultant, and she has been working with strategic analyses related to public health, to gender, governance, and stakeholder engagement with the WHO regional office here in Copenhagen. She is also co-chairing the expert panel on food and nutrition, which is under the UN Convention for Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution, where they are defining future scenarios for sustainable production and consumption. We have Thomas Rolands, and he is the head of corporate social responsibility at Coop, the Danish Coop. Is that correct? Okay. And he is an academic. Has an academic background in anthropology, and he has a special interest in the relationship between people and their food. Some of the initiatives that he has been working with at Coop are trying to influence Danish consumers' choice of food and driving them to more sustainable choices. He's also a Coop's expert on organic food. And he's been developing multiple campaigns related to increasing the amount of organics that are consumed by Danish consumers. And last but not least, we have Jannie Vestergaard, and she is the head of Taste of Skåne, or Smaker på Skåne, at the Skåne Food Innovation Network. And she has a PhD in sensory science, and she's also a member of the steering group of Slow Food Copenhagen. And she will tell you about, when she has a chance to speak, to tell you about what slow food is if you haven't already heard about it. So we have 1.5 hours, 90 minutes for this panel, and the format will be like this. So I'm going to first start off to kind of warm us up, ask questions directly to the four panelists, and then I'm going to open the floor. I think that I can see that there's a lot of questions out there, so I want to make sure that there's more time for you, the audience, to ask those kinds of questions. And then if those questions die out, then I have lots of other questions that I can ask to the panelists. And after these 90 minutes are finished, we'll have let's just turn it all off. Maybe if someone knows how to work this, they can help me. Thank you. I asked you to see me talking to the wall. Oh, look at that. Thank you so much, Mass. Magical. After these 90 minutes, we're going to have 30-minute coffee break. It would also give you an opportunity to speak directly to the panelists and also to each other. So lots of opportunities for networking here. So I wanted to start things off and first ask a question to Susanna. So the Future Nordic Diets report, it focuses a lot on a very holistic way of thinking about food systems. And so I want you to bring things into the real world, okay? Move from just scenarios, but actually into implementation in the real world. How can we facilitate the development and implementation of integrated approaches to sustainability and health? You have a lot of experience there. So I think one of the microphones you can grab.
Does it work? You hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think there's a lot of agreement that we need an integrated approach to sustainable diets, but I think it's also quite complex in its answers, because what ends up on our plate is not only a consequence of what we like, or our health consciousness or our environmental values, but it's much a factor of what is being produced, but more importantly, what is available, what is accessible, and what is affordable in the broader food environment. And by saying that, I just want to point out that it's not enough just to have like health policies or responsible consumption policies speaking about what is sustainable to eat, but we need to look at all the policies that are addressing the food system, and to see like more a comprehensive policy mix of those policies, and then to assess that policy mix to sustainability and health. So to enable such an integrated approach, I think, and talking more from a policy-making perspective, we need to focus on mechanisms in that policy-making process. So in the policy cycle, in the planning, to integrate more research and more assessment about what are in place and how do they succeed in meeting targets or meeting more sustainability and health. So both more assessment in the policy cycle, in the planning phase, and I think that would also, and of course, since there are multiple objectives, it's integrated objectives, both sustainability and health, and there are so many policies that are relevant for the food system, of course there will be a lot of trade-offs and incoherences between policies. And I think that is also important to bring out, because some of them are intended, some we do agree about, and some are unintended because we didn't have enough of research. We were ignoring the effects of certain policies. But I think it's important to look at what type of incoherences are they accepted. So I think also to enable that change is more to look at the coherence, but also to have spaces where we do debate types of incoherences to achieve those goals.
Do you have any kind of tangible examples of what that might look like?
No, but sustainability and economic growth and environmental, they do have, certain trade-offs. I don't want to bring up certain specific examples here, yes, but there will always be incoherences. But I just think we should also focus on them.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that perspective, and I think that we're going to come back to that again, both through questions, but also when we kind of sum up this day, because it kind of brings it ties everything together, this perspective of the mix that we need to consider when it comes to policy. So now I want to jump to you, Anna. The report, it brings up a really stark reality, the reality that we need to decrease our meat consumption by 81 to 90% of current consumption. This means that we'd be consuming somewhere between 80 and about 150 grams per week. Okay, and I forgot I had bought a package of meat to show you what that looks like, but I forgot it at home. And unfortunately, but 150 grams, I mean, if you buy, for example, salami at a deli, that's just a very small amount. It could be about five slices, let's say, of meat in small slices. So it's really, it's a very, very small amount. And are we prepared to reduce that? And I think that you have this experience with the meat guide, and where you kind of worked through some of these kinds of issues related to meat consumption, and you have a lot of experience there, many things to say. And so can you tell us tangibly, how do we actually achieve this?
I could be speaking for 2 hours now.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I want to reply here is that, those figures are not surprising to us. They are coherent with our work, and we, 1.5 year ago, we launched a concept called One Planet Plate. We did a meal that can actually achieve the 1.5 degree target and also be beneficial and good for biodiversity. So we put the climate and biodiversity aspects right up there on the table. And we also saw the same things as you did, that there's room for meat, but there's not much. And you have to consider what you call incoherences or sub-optimizations in the systems. If you only work on climate, then you will be suboptimal when it comes to biodiversity. So we wanted to cover both these facts and to at the same time be able to guide people on the type of diet that you are drawing up here and that we are also talking about. This is really challenging, and our WWF Sweden has been talking less but better meat since 2015 when we launched our meat guide. It shows better meat in a traffic light system. And at that time we were also talking halving of meat consumption in Sweden. Now we know that that's not enough to get us to the 1.5 degrees. So there needs to be a lot more attention on this. There needs to be a lot more inspiration on, for example, food that we have been eating today. And we're right now also entering into a project with the Olympic Committee of Sweden, where we're taking away important misunderstandings regarding if you can eat vegetarian food and still have an active lifestyle. Addressing the protein misunderstanding, addressing the nutrients that you also lifted up as challenges, Johan. So I think we're working in there to get these issues lifted, same as you are. So we're on the same arena, actually.
I didn't actually write the report there. So Johan is representing the...
Yeah, but the food policy lab, I mean, you're going in the same direction.
Yes, of course, yeah. And so I mean, I really like that example of working with the Olympic Committee, because that's something that you're doing and you're kind of dispelling some myths.
Mm.
What other kind of work have you done in this area?
Well, I mean, we think that it's quite important with inspiration for consumers, but we also think that it's important not to put the burden of doing this on the consumers. So we do a lot of work towards corporates. We have the supply chain initiative with companies in the corporate chain. And we also do policy influence. I mean, we have a Swedish food strategy, which we actually didn't manage to influence as much as we would have liked to. We weren't as successful in this lobbyism as some other stakeholders were. But anyhow, we need to be present on the political arena too, to see that policy and corporates and consumption goes hand in hand. I mean, it used to be impossible to talk about a meat tax, for example, if you talk about policy instruments. Now, it may be maturing, so maybe in 15 years we will have a meat tax, and that will be because somebody was brave, and then somebody else was brave, and then somebody else was a bit braver, and small steps were taken.
Great, thank you. I think that really complements what Susanna had said. Now I wanted to move to you, Thomas. You kind of bring this really interesting perspective to the mix. It's this kind of anthropological perspective, but also you're looking at consumers and what they want to buy. And so this is something I've been wondering a lot lately, is that how do you actually influence that from a supermarket level? And how do you change behavior, and what kind of work is Coop doing to do that? Can you explain that to us?
I can try.
Yeah.
First of all, I'd just say thank you for the very interesting presentation also this morning and the report. I think it's somehow mind-changing to look at the end goal instead of always looking at the small incremental steps we can all take. So for me, that was really great. Well, just to give you some examples, not in the first stage about what we're doing, I'll come back to that, but on the developments of the consumption patterns, I actually see some promising signs, I have to say. I also see clearly a perspective that it's going too slow in order to actually change diets in this direction that we have been talking about this morning. First of all, people know we have actually tried to ask consumers, give them 10 different choices, which ones are the worst for the climate of these 10 different products, and which ones are the best. And basically all consumers can place red meat at the top and carrots in the bottom, right, of what choices we gave them. There's a lot more problems in between, but the general picture is that you want to reduce your meat consumption if you're going to have a climate impact through your private diet. That's actually quite widely understood in the population. 62% actually have claimed that they want to eat more vegetables and more plant-based diet. 25% say they also want to reduce their consumption of meat and red meat in particular. So at least from sort of perspective of what people would like to do, we're on the right track. That doesn't correlate with what they do in the supermarket, however. So that's a bad part of the equation. But we can see that some groups of people have actually moved quite dramatically through the last 10, 15 years. And we've done another survey once where we asked consumers, and that was actually just to sort them into different categories. We asked them what categories they bought organic products in. And then we took all the consumers and lined them up, you could say. Here we have 25% of consumers who said that they bought organic products in at least 4 different categories of products. That could be vegetables, it could be cereals, milk products, etc. On the other hand, you had, on the other end of the spectrum, you had 25% saying they didn't care about organic and they wouldn't buy it. And in the middle, you had this big 50% group that would do it more or less, sometimes in some categories. And then we just looked at these 3 groups' meat consumption, just the meat consumption. And we removed all the vegetarians, all the pescatarians, all the ones that's been eating out, and only looked at the meat consumption of the actual meat consuming consumers. The 25% that stated that they were buying organic quite often, they used around 70 grams of meat on a day. And the 25% of consumers who said they would never buy organic products, they would be using more than 140 grams of meat per day. So this is the double, actually. So if you look into, okay, what distinguishes actually these groups of consumers? Why do we have some consumers over here that have already half the meat consumption? They're eating less than 400 grams per week, whereas the other group probably eat more than a kilogram. What characteristics do they have? Well, first of all, they are higher educated, they're better educated. They know how to cook. They do like they like cooking. In that way, vegetables fill their plate. So there's not enough room for meat. It's not like they don't like meat. There's just not enough room for it because they prepare other things. And what I write here, they fly a lot more. They are more wealthy. So there's also something that pulls in the other direction. If you look at the total climate footprint of that consumer, it might turn out that their diet is not the worst bit of what they do. But at least this is what it looks like. And one last thing that they also had in common is that they believe that their choices could have an impact in the world. Whereas the other end of the spectrum, they refuse that their choices would actually change the way the work world, the future. I mean, my choice, what difference does it make really? But the 25% group, they think that their choices do matter. So at least to me, that gives me some direction if I want to make a campaign to make people change consumption patterns. I should try to get more people to actually think that their choices will make a difference. I should also try to make more people interested in cooking. I should also try to show them how vegetables could actually taste great. And in that sense, there will be less space for meat in their normal buying behavior. So these are some of the things that we, of course, try to do in campaigns. But I also have to say that it's very hard to change consumer habits. This habit has maybe this habit about buying organic. It's something that's been growing from, I think we had 4% organic turnover in 2000. Now we have 13. But it has taken us 18 years to put this extra 14% or extra 10% on top. So it is very, very slow when we want to change these habits. Maybe I shouldn't talk more now, but I have a lot of other points.
Yes, but
I'll keep them.
We're going to get back to you. We're
Yeah.
going to kind of circle it around here because I think it's also important to see how what you have to say connects.
Yeah.
And so definitely, I will follow up with all of you. But Jannie, I wanted to move to you. And we saw that in the Future Nordic Diets report that the scenarios are all about local, organic production and consumption. But the big question remains, how can you actually make this accessible and affordable to everybody? And this is something you've worked with very closely, both through Taste of Skåne, but also through Slow Food. So I think that if you could approach it from both sides, and then maybe explain to everyone what exactly those organizations are doing.
Yes, I got the question already during lunchtime. What is slow food? Well, do you eat slowly or? Well, Slow Food is an international organization established 86 in Italy as an opposition to a fast food company establishing themselves at the Spanish stairs in Rome. So that was the slow food movement when it was established, and it's all about working for a better future for all of us, and when it comes to food and the right for everybody to a meal. And the slogan is like good, fair, and clean. So it embraces everything I would say about a sustainable food system. And if you didn't go to Turin 1 week ago to Terra Madre, Salon del Gusto, I would recommend you doing it. It's the biggest fair in the world for small-scale producers, where you can find more than 110 different countries showing their sustainable food systems, products and producers and everything together. Very fascinating. And we also this year, with the help of Nordic Council of Ministers, were able to arrange a Terra Madre Nordic for the first time here in Copenhagen. It was also a very nice gathering to see and work with people that have, like kind of the same ideas about our common future when it comes to sustainable food systems. So that was the organization. And when it comes to accessibility and affordability of local foods, I've been working with this issue for the last 25 years, 12 years in Finland, and now 8 years in Sweden, and before that a little bit in Denmark as well. But it's about finding the right people to connect with, and that we all have to somehow to think about ourselves as responsible, not only as consumers, but also as purchasers, as producers, and so on. So the way we have been working with local food in Skåne is that once there was a retailer coming to us and say, "Whoa, I have this passion about local food, but how can I expose it to people in my supermarket?" And this was a rather big ICA Maxi in Brunella, which is the eastern part of Skåne. And let's see what we can do. And he did one very, very simple thing. He put up mushrooms from Poland besides mushrooms from the neighboring village. The price was the double. Okay? Which one did he sell? The local ones, just because it had this sign saying from Skåne. So that was where it all took off in 2009 for us, and we have ever since been working with not the supermarket chains as such, but the retailers. It's about human beings. It's about finding the passionate people to make it accessible in the supermarkets. So today you can find Taste of Skåne, locally produced and carefully selected. The carefully selected part is the retailer taking responsibility for the product. And you can find it in 30 shops. And it's now 7 years ago we launched this concept. And it's been successful. It's not, it's not huge, but it's still, I mean, as a consumer wanting to find the local produce, you can do it. Another aspect of this taking responsible is also what Thomas was saying. It's a slow system, and when the system is too slow, what happens? We don't want to sit and wait, do we? No, we take action. So in 2012, we heard about the Reka rings in Finland for the first time, where consumers took demand of what they wanted to purchase. It's a digital system. You purchase and you order from the producers put up their products, and then once in a week you meet in a parking lot somewhere and you pay for the goods, or you have even paid for them digitally. Today this system is also in Sweden, and only last week or 2 weeks ago the first attempt to try this in Denmark saw the light. And I would say on a Nordic base there are about 600,000 consumers now involved in this system, and it means about 3% of the population of Nordic countries. It's not much, but it's still a lot. And that's what's happening when, that's both about accessibility and affordability. You can still, if you go to supermarkets in Skåne or the delicatessen shops where you can find the local produce, some of them are still very expensive, but some of the retailers have actually found the recipe for making it also affordable, and that's by not putting a 30% on top of the purchase price, but krona. So if one retailer is gaining, let's say, 88 krona of another Swedish honey, not a locally produced, but a Swedish honey, he will have 80 krona plus on the account. Then he will also do the same thing with the local honey. So even though the purchase price is higher, the end price is also only 8 krona in his pocket. And that's how you can actually reduce the prices on locally produced produce, that you should not put on the 30% or the 20 or the 10 or whatever, but think about it as in krona, because these passionate people, they take responsibility and they say, okay, 8 krona, that's enough for me. I will put the rest on the producer and the consumer in order for them to purchase local food, because I want to support the social system around in my village or in my town. So, I could also talk for 2 hours about this. I won't. But I'm willing to answer any questions you ever have out there. So
Fantastic. No, it obviously means that we have a lot of room for other forums and other ways we can...
Yeah, there's both the traditional ways. Looking at the consumer patterns. Digitalization is there, right? Okay. But how much are we actually purchasing on the internet today when it comes to food? It's less than 7% if we think about Sweden. I think it's even lesser in Denmark. I don't know about Norway and Finland as such. So it means that it will take another 20 years also maybe for the digitalization before maybe 50% of us purchase our food digitally. So it means we will go to the supermarket to purchase our food. Of course, the supermarkets need to step up. They need to find new ways because digitalization will threaten them. And also the consumer-driven market channels will actually pursue this issue. But the best thing is that yesterday in Sweden, in Skåne, we for the first time had ICA supermarket in Höganäs had invited the local Reka ring to stand on the parking lot. So it means that you had the delivery of the goods directly from the farmers, and then you could go and buy your milk and your toilet paper and your newspaper and everything else. Okay, so that's when we take responsibility in more parts of the system, right?
That's a really, I really like.
Yeah,
that.
I love the
So
example.
it's not a competition per se, but it's
No.
how we can work together,
Yes.
form new models,
And-
basically purchasing food. But I think Anna had something she wanted to add on to that.
Yeah, I wanted to bridge the two of you, but now I also wanted to say that actually these are not new models, really. It's been going on for quite a long time that farmers have been producing stuff and selling them directly to people. So I think we really need to do what you said last, because if you look at people and think that it's a normally distributed curve, you will have a whole lump of people in the middle who will not be doing this Reko rings, and you have these sustainability champions who are at the forefront. But how to address the big lump of people that are in the retail stores? And I would just like to signal to you the same thing as Jannie does, that I think retail really needs to step up, because what happens if we act on the fact that we need to eat less meat and more vegetarian stuff, then the market shares for this goes out of the country. It's a lot of the stuff that we ask people to eat is imported. Quinoa, avocado, sweet potatoes, blah, blah, blah. So I mean, there's a lot of things to do for the farmers and for the retailers, and for the retailers to have long-term cooperations with the farmers to solve this, because you can't just say that, oh, there's not enough stuff for us to buy. You need to develop a cooperation with the farming community.
Could I just say one adjustment to
Just
this?
one
Yeah.
quick thing, and then I want to interject. As well.
The big difference between Reko rings and normal markets is that you actually do the shopping on the digital platform. So it means when the farmer comes to deliver the goods, it's not a selling point, it's delivering the goods. So it means a more secure way of selling your products, because if you go to a market, you will never know, will you sell 10 kilos of the meat you bought, or 15, or all 100 kilos. You know this in advance, and that's the advantage with the Reko rings and the consumer-driven channels.
Good point. Susanna, I just wanted to reflect on some of the dialogue that we were having over email, because you asked me an interesting question that kind of you wanted to ask to you wanted to be asked, and that question was about who is the leader in this transformation. So if we kind of move from just looking at supermarkets and different ways of purchasing food, we kind of look at the broader picture, who is going to take leadership over this, or which kind of organizations, is it government, who is responsible in your opinion?
Well, in my opinion, I think also that what we have actually mentioned here, that changes are needed at multiple levels and by so many different actors. So it's hard to point out one leadership. But again, I'm coming more from policy-making perspective, so I'm looking more at national governments, but I see that all the more societal actors are very important as well in this process. So it's hard because, as we know, changes are needed everywhere. And I think we have all different roles in enabling that change. So we can more speak about what kind of role does different actors have in that process. So I think for the governments, it's mainly about actually trying to combine all these visions to one shared vision and have a food policy on a shared direction. So not only speaking about growth, economic growth and productivity, but what is a vision, a direction for the food system, and to make it a shared vision. So that is one, role in, taking leaderships. But I think there are many, many important people and actors.
Based on your experience, just to follow up with that, based on your experience, is there any particular country that's doing this well?
Well, I think the Nordics. I mean, I'm also more been working on health and public health. So that is actually my main area. Public health interventions and diets. And I think in the European region, I see that the Nordic countries are comparatively very advanced in not only focusing on the traditional approach to diets, and through interventions like nutrition education, integrating nutrition in schools and primary health care centers and so on, but also more focusing on food quality and other, also enabling spaces where research could meet firms and having more innovations when it comes to food. So I think the Nordics are quite interested and engaged in this vision. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thomas, I'm going to let you. You're just dying to say something, and I'm going to give you the floor, and then we'll turn it over to the audience to ask some questions.
No, actually, I don't know if does it work?
The bottom.
That one.
Oh yeah, take that one.
Works. Yeah. No, actually, I just want to point out the organic production again, because what I think we can learn from the development of the organic market is actually something we should take a closer look on if we want to change the diets as a whole, you can say. Because what happened when you introduced organics to the market some 30 years ago was actually that you had the policy level, the creation of some rules regarding production. You had also a clear label. You had a lot of money, actually public money, being spent on awareness-raising campaigns towards consumers. You had all the different actors in the existing value chain actually embracing organic products. You had supermarkets, you had producers, you had wholesalers, you had, of course, the primary producers as well. It took some time with some of the ones in the middle of the chain, you can say. What you haven't done, though, because remember, it took 30 years to go from 0 to 13% of our total turnover. What you haven't done is to use any economic incentives, and we just know that it works. If you really want something to happen on the normal consumer market, you also need to embrace some of the economic incentives that only a government actually can do. So I'm afraid to say that the organic case shows that the whole, you can say, chain needs to work together. You need some clear vision, clear definition of what you are doing and what the goal is. But you cannot change fast enough if you do it the same way. There's a lot of learnings, but you need something else, in my opinion.
Great. So I'm going to turn. I know you have a rebuttal, but I want to see if there's any questions from the audience, and I'm sure you're gonna be able to say what you want to say as a response. So I have a question here. I have a question there. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to remind you that agroecology has to do with also cultural acceptable diets. So that limits how much you can force people to change.
Yeah.
This project has shown
Thank you. Sorry about that. I think this will work better.
This project has shown us how ruminants are important for the sustainable food production in Scandinavia, and how wrong can it be to say that red meat is bad for the climate instead of focusing on how the meat is produced. How will a red meat tax help the consumer to make the right choice? Will it not take the focus on the important choice instead of putting all red meat in the same bad bag?
Fantastic question, and I definitely think this will stir up some debate. So we'll take it with you from your side first.
Okay, well, this is the one question that I'm talking mostly about in my ordinary life as mother of the meat guide in Sweden. We have a grandmother at Swedish University of Agricultural Science, actually. But okay, so the red meat, the ruminants, they are the extremely important parts of our agronomical system. They stand for a good part of the biodiversity that is threatened, and my WWF right now is talking about the 6th big extinction of species. And I mean, what we need to do is to keep the ruminants. and to keep them on land that stands for high biodiversity values. And that means that in this, for example, in this meat guide that we have, we give green light to organic meat or natural pasture meat. And we would really like to see, the natural pasture meat to be elevated in this, for example, in these retail systems, that it's made accessible to consumers, that it's increased, that the pastures aren't reforested, but kept open. So this is an extremely important part of our work, and it's the big balance between climate and biodiversity. Because from a climate point of view, yes, that meat is actually quite bad. But from a biodiversity point, it's wonderful. So our communication goes quite a lot at eat less and better meat. And better meat is meat that has high values for biodiversity or makes use of these byproducts that you have been looking at in the system. That it was an original function of the meat. Not the ruminants, but the monogastrics in our systems.
You want to say something again?
Yeah, and I just, if you don't know about this campaign, you should really go and look into it. I think it's wonderful. I mean, I can say this I'm Danish, but I work in Sweden, so and from the Finnish perspective as well. I think it's really, really wonderful communication about the meat. Eat less, but eat better. I mean, it doesn't take a lot to understand that. Back to the issue about who's taking responsibility for what. I think the time when the red organic brand in Denmark was launched is a totally another time that we are living in now. I mean, for the first time this year, I could see the shelves in my local Irma was filled with vegan and vegetarian food. I never saw that happen before. Never ever in Denmark, but in Sweden and Finland, long time before. So I think this is like, it's happening faster than we think it will happen, because the consumers are more aware. A larger amount of the consumers are much more aware. We still have like the 70% or more that are not that aware, but there is a potential. And that's the potential that is moving towards these alternative ways of purchasing the food that they want to consume. I think that's one very important view to have with us today, that we cannot continue to think, oh, but it was like this 20 years ago, because digitalization is here for staying here. I mean, it's like we should not avoid it, but we should use it instead, and use it to change the food system.
Do you want to tack something onto there? Yeah?
But I do agree fully on what you say, actually. But I'm just left with this feeling that 50% of the consumers, they don't care. What can we do about it? They actually only care about prices because they don't feel the products on the supermarket shelves, and they don't crave anything that's not there. So they think it's okay, go for the cheapest. So more scandals, yeah, okay. but still, I think still we cannot rely on the consumers and the digitalization and the willingness to pay and the enlightened people out there to actually drive this change. We also need some of the big actors like us and like the food producers that produce and sell all the normal goods that's not vegan or organic or whatever, to actually take some kind of responsibility. And one big trend, of course, is the vegetarian and vegan products that's growing. But what's growing a lot more rapidly is actually convenience food and ready-made food that people will buy from maybe not even supermarkets. That's a trend that's growing faster in terms of volume, a lot faster. So how can we embrace that and actually make sure that also in this ready-made food, good Nordic, sustainably produced ingredients will actually be in that product instead of some crap that often ends up there. So you have to embrace all these tendencies that's out there in the consumer, the sea of consumers, and see how can we use them in the benefit of actually changing the system in a better direction, and not just only rely on the well-educated few.
Right. Thank you very much for that. And you have the next question. And you have the next. It's no. You have to press the bottom of it hard, like yeah, where the green light is, or else I can bring you another one.
Or shout.
Or shout. You can also shout.
Well, thanks for the panel discussion. I'm personally interested in sustainability leadership. I'm interested in sustainability leadership, and I very much like, and I'm not from Denmark or any other Scandinavian country, so I hope to be able to provide maybe 2 little viewpoints from the outside in that help to shift maybe the one or other mind. Because I very much like what you've been talking about, and it comes from my heart, the way you approach these things, and also that you look at the very local level and include small farming in discussion and so on. However, after my education in engineering business school, I know that reality out there is changing super fast, and it's gonna affect Scandinavia as much as any other country in the world. So in terms of responsible consumption and production, goal 12, by the way, in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and serious one. In terms of sustainability leadership, well, first, leadership. You've been talking about vision. I think people in Scandinavia are not 100% aware of how much they are role model for the world, at least not all of them. That's what I've found over the years living in many different countries. And I wonder, like, you haven't been at all mentioning innovation, disruptive innovation or not much. You have been mentioning yet now the last sentences a bit more, but there's so much going on in terms of, from lab-based meat to quinoa grown in Scandinavia, first experiments, which people know, right? How do you want to make sure that farmers in Scandinavia are being taken care of and help to shift, to adapt? I don't know what's going to take, but how are you going to include that in the whole mindset and the complexity, right? I love scenario analysis and all these kind of things, but there's going to come up stuff that's going to be really disruptive. So that's one thing. And the second thing in terms of sustainability, well, I'm personally 99% vegan and triathlete, so I think you mentioned that it must be possible, right, that without any supplementation you can perform fully as a vegan. I think living proof. I've never been faster than now. But it's also the cheapest way of eating, because I don't have to spend money on, meat, expensive cheese, and so on. Candy I'm not eating anyway. So what am I going to do with that money? So it's a very efficient way of providing my body with all the nutrient it needs. Well, I have, through the efficiency gain, money, resources available. And what am I doing with that? Well, I'm spending it on plane tickets, right, to go skiing on the Lofoten Islands, right? So, I mean, in terms of sustainability, you need, from a policy perspective, to consider the rebound effect there. There must be a cultural shift somehow that people spend money more on food, and that the food production, and that's why I very much appreciate this discussion, because there is very inefficient small-scale farming, right, that doesn't aim for efficiency gains at all. So that's a way of actually increasing sustainability from a holistic perspective. I don't know if that sort of makes sense to everyone here, but at least those are my 2 viewpoints.
Great, thank you so much. Can you remember those 2 questions? I'm sure that all 4 of you can provide some kind of response to that, but you decide who wants to take the microphone first. It was an easy choice.
I'll go first. I think it's wonderful. Okay, thanks for the discussion on the rebound effects. I think that's really interesting, because some of the people that we listen to say better buy a really, really expensive piece of meat and enjoy it. And then you won't have money left over to do all of that expensive flying around. So good question. And I mean, you don't have to fly. I mean, you can take the train to the Alps and go skiing.
That's what I'm personally doing. But
yeah. Yeah, but I mean, from an analytical point of view, yes, of course, important with the rebound effects. And this disruptive innovation, I think that's really interesting, because there are things happening, as you say, with the market developing. There are people making protein substitutes out of rapeseed. They're looking at grass to feed human beings with. And I mean, the Innovation Fund in Sweden just funded an interesting project on proteins that could come from plants, lupin or whatever. So, I mean, there's lots of innovation going on. However, I think those systems you have to enable them, because it stimulates our creativity, our curiousness for new things. But I mean, it could also lead us in complicated directions. For example, if you look at this insects thing, which I know Afton has been looking clearly into, and that has been on the scene here. I mean, that could cause a struggle for us in getting people to adopt strange things in their diets. So I think these things have to develop organically, which I mean, not organic as in organic farming, but dynamically. I mean, things are being picked up because of trends that we couldn't foresee. We couldn't foresee that Swedes would be eating so much Korean food as they now do. How did that actually happen? Well, somebody picked it up, it became a trend, and then things just took off. So, I mean, a dynamic, organic way of reacting to this disruptive innovation, I think, is interesting. But I think you may have something to say about this.
And just to interject, just in the same way that we changed our diets, post-war, we weren't eating so much meat before. We changed those very rapidly. So I think it's not part of just this traditional diet. We've also had different ways of eating, 7 years ago that don't reflect what we're eating today. So I think that's also a part of this argument as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the point. I mean, really, I do want some more rapid innovation, really, to take place. And if you follow the trends, say on lab-grown meat, for instance, the prices of that, you can foresee that in 4 or 5 years it will probably be cheaper than making the cheapest possible pig here in Denmark, for instance. And when that happens, the 50% of consumers that don't care about where the food comes from, but just want the price, they have to go and buy the lab-grown meat, or they have to go and buy the vegan or vegetarian-made substitute for that meat, which also could be produced cheaper than meat itself, because it doesn't have to go through an animal to actually be turned into human protein. So yeah, I think we have to believe in both ends of this scale. This is actually the end point of the high-tech intensification agriculture. Where you in the end will end up feeding a lot of people that don't really care, you can say, but with the cheapest products that in the end will be plant-based. And on the other hand, you will have a different way. That's the consumers that we probably represent more, that want to eat meat from time to time as a luxury, but want it grass-fed, locally grown, and pay a fortune for it. Lovely. And there need to be room for that as well. But I think we need to actually hope that both these trends will actually give some part of the solution.
I'm not sure if this fits in this now here, but I just wanted to comment also on your discussion and questions there about leadership, and that we really focus on technological innovation. But I really think that we are really good at that here in Scandinavia. And if you read the new Swedish food policy, it has a huge focus on productivity and innovation and, interaction between research and development and firms to develop new markets. But I think, what is also relevant, what we haven't discussed here, is about values. Deeper down, it's also about how we value the environment, the relation between man and environment, and that will then transcend to your other actions, or if you want to fly and so on. So, we can't just say that it should be solved by very smart innovation policies. That is one thing, but to have a deeper change, that will necessarily involve another relations to the environment, I believe. So I just wanted to comment on that. The change are quite complex. Innovation is one part, but there are many parts in making that happen.
Thank you.
Thank you for the viewpoints. I think they are very, very important and coming from the youth. I also forgot to say earlier that there are some slow food use network people here. So those of you being students should gather with those people and talk more about sustainability and food systems. Right? Viola, Laura, where are you? Yes. Come on. Yes, but that was just a side note. About disruptive behavior, I think the record rings, they are super disruptive. They were disrupting, the system. And actually, some of the retailers in Finland, they felt the threat immediately. So they invited the record rings to stand on their parking lots so they could cooperate. If that's not disruption, I don't know what is disruption. But of course, we should think about disruption in technological terms, as you're talking about the meat that can be produced in labs and so on, but I think we as consumers, we need to take action if we want things to happen. And then the politicians, the leadership, the governmental issues. And talking about food policies, I think, I was part of the first Finnish food strategy when it came in 95, I think, 97 maybe. And that was kind of disruptive too, because then food was all in a sudden on the politicians' lips on a more systematic, in a more systematic way. And now we have a Swedish policy, and also we have a lot of regional food policies in Sweden. And the Skåne one, it took us 3 years to work that out. Can you imagine why? Because in Skåne we have the big industries, we have 800 small-scale producers, we have the universities, we have everything there. And for them to gather to get something really comprehensive, and Skåne is in Swedish terms a little bit different. Swedish people know what I mean. Both those coming up from further north and those coming from Skåne. So it means that we took a very thorough look upon the national food policy. The processes were parallel, but it took us a little bit longer to get to the Skåne one. But we actually took it a bit further because we have an action for circular economy and sustainability very, very, very pronounced, and that is not even mentioned in the Swedish food policy, only in small sidelines, and that was what Anna was talking about, lobbyism and so on. But I think, so that's the political leadership that we need on a regional base and also on a local. There are even now towns in Sweden working on the local food policies, Malmö, Gothenburg, and so forth. So, I think the rest of the Nordic countries need to get on the same track somehow. But so there are a lot of issues here. And again, about leadership, the government in Denmark, when you were mentioning about the organic movement taking form, it was the government putting money into also public catering. Okay, so driving the public catering, putting money into making changes, that helps. And in Sweden and Finland, where the public catering is many million meals a day, it's a really important tool for politicians to drive forward ideas and systematic changes as well. So, again, we could talk hours for this, but it just means that there are a lot of different issues that need to be addressed in this.
Right. So moving to the next question, we have live.
Yes, I'm live from the Danish Ecological Council, an NGO in Denmark. I think it's a very interesting.
Can you hear him? Okay. Yeah.
It's a very interesting discussion, and it's mostly going on the role of the supermarkets, the role of the NGOs, the role of the consumers. And now, at the end, we had a little talk about political leadership. But that's what I would talk a little more about. I think I experienced a few examples, only a few. I wish there were more of them, but a few examples of real political leadership One was about the lamps, the EU demand for changing the burning lamps, which changed a lot for energy use.
The light bulbs.
Light bulbs.
The light bulbs.
Yeah, light bulbs. Yeah. One other thing was the change in smoking. It changed real fast from everybody smoking everywhere till nobody smoking in public areas. That was political leadership. I think we also have political leadership with the circular economy, with this new demands from the EU. We'll see. My question is, how can we get some political leadership towards changing the diet? Next week, the Danish politicians will come with a large climate plan. I wonder if they say that one of the most important things for climate is how much meat you eat. I don't think so, and I don't think they have some political measures to say we do it like this. Which kind of which kind of politics could you recommend? We have talked a little about tax for meat, but it's very problematic because we have this with the biodiversity meat and meat from industrial meat production. Could you imagine any other good politics?
All right. Who wants to answer that question? Yeah. Go first.
Okay, no, this is something that I've been thinking also about, and I mean it's difficult because from my point of view, I think that is what is lacking right now, and I share your analysis that I mean corporates are moving ahead, consumers are interested, there's consumer trends, but the politics are lagging. So what we did in Sweden with the local policies is that there was a competition for local school food. So we made the criteria there for what is a good municipality for sustainable food in the schools. So we addressed local policy and targeted the schools, the public procurement of food, because we thought that was a good entry point. That's quite possible to get a policy initiative on a local basis. It's easier there than on the national level. So on the national level in Sweden, we see the national food strategies, I mean, the big mainstream thing. And what you mentioned about innovation is true. I mean, they have done good things on innovation. But still, if you go, for example, to the Coop, there's a climate policy globally. I think there's an awakening to the fact that there is that food is quite an important part. But we don't see this trickling into our national politics. So, I mean, local and global policy, but there's a gap here in the national policy, really.
I could just add, I actually did a search on FIO's Eurolex, where you can search for policies, and I wanted to see if there were any policies focused on sustainable food systems. I didn't find any. I had to Google, and then I found, of course, Sweden, but that's so recent, so it wasn't included. But what we found was Sweden, Finland, the Netherlands, and France as examples. Then they have different programs, addressing different issues. And I think that is one of the problems, that there's no strategic direction because they are implemented in different programs. And it's not horizontal, it's vertical coordinated. So that's why I want to focus on, leadership, requires a shared vision. So we need also mechanisms to enable that ministers sits together. And I'm coming from a health perspective, but we see actually in Norway, they have this kind of mechanisms called interministerial mechanisms for health. So in health, we have had this health in all policy thinking, and it comes actually from Finland, and it's been in place since the 1780s. And now it's actually a guidance for health in the EU. So it's separate from Finland to the EU level. So collaboration and coordination when it comes to health policy is quite elaborated, through established mechanisms. But this is kind of new sustainability and diet. So So I think it's good also to highlight good examples from other policy areas, how you could coordinate, how you could have more policy coherence. Yeah.
Yeah, you had something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask one question, actually. Because, again, there are so many things happening. And also the UN sustainability goals are quite new. So don't you think they would influence what you were just saying, that it, you need common, you need to enable ministers and so on to sit down on the same table? And don't you think that the UN sustainability goals could be like one tool to have in the hand to say, okay, how should we go in direction with number 12 and so on?
Yeah. Anna? I can just add before you want to answer.
No, I'll pass.
Governments are asked to report on their implementation, so they will need to report what they're doing. But I was surprised with the Swedish food policy because it came after the sustainable development goals, and I don't see that reflection in the policy, but I see it in the Finnish policy. That they have more clearly a food system approach. So.
I agree.
Did you want to add something to that?
Maybe I'm just the one guy spoiling all the good intentions all the time here. No, I was just saying I agree with all what you said, that's a kind of policy framework we want to create or need to create. I think one big disadvantage, at least when you're talking about the Danish situation, is that our whole farming system is so export-oriented. Really, 80-85% of all the kilojoules that it produces goes for export. And in that sense, it's so focused on keeping the prices and costs down on the export market that we have not yet seen any really thorough, comprehensive policy, I think, in Denmark. And I think it has to do with that fact. That's why France, for instance, is moving, or Sweden, which has also an agricultural production that is much more focusing on the home market. There it makes sense. It's very difficult here.
Well, actually, in the Swedish food strategy, is quite a lot of focus on the export, and this has been worrying me a bit, actually, because I don't think the analysis behind that is quite sound. On the other hand, we have potential to produce quite a lot of things that would be valuable in other places. So on the world market, but we don't want to see that we, as you say, export with a very low price, but we export on the values that we have here in Sweden or in the Nordics. That we're good at producing grass, we can do good grazing animals and have high quality in the food production. So those are the values that we would like to send with the products, not just powdered milk.
Very shortly, because I've been working in Nordic contexts for the last 25 years, and I always have this little point, and that's very important when you sit in a Nordic conference like this, because Denmark is an agricultural country. Point. Sweden, Finland, Norway are not agricultural countries. Point. So that makes a whole lot of difference. And that's why, when I'm not talking about export. Okay? So it's like it doesn't, it's just a dip in this ocean, So it has no impact compared to the impact of Danish agricultural export. So that's, we always have to think about these small differences. In this case, it's a very huge difference. But in in culture and other expressions of the Nordics, we are more like the same, but not in this case.
Good point. I think that just before we get to the next question, can we just stand up and shake? Because I feel that it's easy to feel a little bit tired at this hour. Yes? Right. Perfect. All right. Okay, sit down. Don't take it too much advantage. All right. Okay, let's
I'm Torsten. I'm from Coop, but the member organization part of Coop. In case you don't know, Coop is a cooperative, as the name may indicate, but the member organization is actually the country council, which I'm part of, that actually stands for and secures that we follow the guidelines, the values we have written into our bylaws. Roland Thomas is enforcing our intentions in the business, but the business apart from that is very much a business. So that's how Coop and the organization Coop fits together. In the county council, we try to look ahead, and being Danish, we know that we are not like Skåne, just a little bit different. We know we are very much different from the other countries. I have been working in the Swedish and Norwegian countries too, so I know we can compare it, but the comparison is it's not equal. The important thing, I think, coming from with the Danish voice, is that making a policy through politicians like a meat tax is not going to happen, not at all. And frankly, I'm not that sure it would be good, because we have these discussions about some meat is good, isn't it? There's a difference, and should the tax then be differentiated? And it will be a hell of all actors trying to get their goods out of the tax bracket. And what about artificial food, meat? They say it's the same, so it should be taxed, and stuff like that. It'll be a lot of mess. What I think is efficient is to have the local government and communities to make changes. We see it in Copenhagen, where the mayor of Copenhagen has said we are going to be organic, end of story, and it goes for hospitals and all kind of publicly serviced places where they serve food is going to be organic, and we have a center for food excellence that teaches them in how to go from conventional to organic, and they are so far ahead that it's going extremely well, and then that will be a beacon for how to do it, because this mayor, Copenhagen, will brag about how good they are, and then other cities want to be good as well. Because there will be some money in it, there will be tourism in it, there will be other values in it. This is working without forcing anyone's hands or any things that can work contrary to the intention. So I believe very much in this kind of organic, the movement growth, that will work. The other thing I want to mention is that I'm in the IT business, and as you may know, generation in the IT business is probably 2 years. It's not like a human generation. It's very, very rapidly. Our minds have difficulties in understanding exponential growth. We don't understand how much it matters if you start 6 months before. 2 years later, it's a tenfold difference. That is not intuitively understood. But I do believe we are in the middle of a lot of exponential changes. We see them in a bad way, like when we have the anti-vaccination movements, and we have a lot of people deselecting foods because of gluten or other stuff. I mean, not very scientific things going out, but the digitalization works, communication works, it's a global village, and everybody can communicate. And unfortunately, bad news are easier to communicate than good news. Exactly, bad news. We need some disasters, you said. But the thing is that I think this way of communicating and improving communication, getting clearer messages out, is going to help a lot. The attention span of consumers today is short. Messages about climate and things like that is difficult. I'm looking at an initiative where we have some marking and information methods that will make it easier for people to make educated choices. It's very difficult because academics don't like it because it's not very precise. End users may not be interested in why should we use this information. So it's a lot of education. But there's one force that actually works very well for us, and that's the cooperative entities. In Denmark we have a great tradition for cooperatives. We just forgot about it because 20 years ago or so, something like that, it turns out that the biggest industries or companies in Denmark are all cooperatives. We have banks, we have retailer, Coop is the biggest or second biggest, and we have agricultural like Tulip, and we have Arla Foods. Arla is the world's biggest dairy. I mean, owned by the members. That way of working has been forgotten, and we do think that within Coop we can actually reintroduce that to the communities. So it will be member-driven, meaning that the values of the members will actually drive the message, not some advertising bureau trying to understand what is the message and then trying to make it a popular tagline or something like that. If it comes from the members and the people who drive it, we will see it happening. And it will take a very long time, but given the way the digitalization, I think, is improving this exponential growth and spreading of messages, I have some hope that we can actually change to a better informed choices. But I'm open for input.
Panama Papers and
So that was more of an intervention, wasn't it? That was more of a something to raise.
Something that
yeah.
could happen, changing the end users.
Fantastic.
Informational levels.
No, thank you very much for that intervention. And I wanted to pass the microphone back here because I promised you that you'd have the next question, then we'll move to Max, and then to Jessica, and then we'll have to go into the coffee break. So keep your question brief, please, and keep your responses brief.
Okay. Like, I belong to like the millennial generation where, like our world has become a lot smaller, and, like we know stuff about each other even if we live a million miles away. But like within what we're talking about, there is the stress on local food and how we should like continue eating more locally. And as much as I agree with, like all these innovations about, like how I saw like pak choi being like some Danish farmers talking about growing pak choi and things like that. But what would it do for future, like the future of like an international mindset for like the future generations if, like they only believe that all the food they eat is only from like the small piece of land that they live on, and I mean, of course they'll still like know that there is land beyond where they live, but like within food at least, like how will they be exposed to that?
Who wants to take a shot at that?
Very interesting also because, of course, slow food is an international movement, or NGO, and so we are thinking a lot about this. But first of all, I would say local is local where you live, right? But you still, I mean, in Denmark and the Nordic countries, we still do drink coffee, and we still do drink tea, and we still eat a lot of chocolate, and you can't grow them here, or rice, or whatever. So what you are suggesting is that maybe the world becomes more narrow when you only eat local food. But you also said that you know your friends, you know things about people even though you haven't met them and you live like 1,000 miles away. So I don't really think what you are suggesting is a problem, because you will also share your photos with food, and you will still do traveling, and you will still, we haven't talked much about identity and culture, actually, food identity, food culture, and I think that's one important aspect also to add into this equation. Because we had a short mentioning about culture here, but not too much. But I think that's one very huge part, and also one very huge part in your consumers' culture. And innovation is also culture.
Yeah, I can go to. I like to say that the millennials in Sweden are leading the transformation when it comes to vegan and vegetarian food. So that's a big thing. But it's a missed opportunity in their relation with the surrounding countryside and the agriculture, and to get them to know where the food is coming from. So that we don't succeed in.
Eating a lot of soy.
Yeah, they do eat a lot of soy in these vegan diets.
I don't think I can add much to it. We had a very funny experience this January, because supermarkets competed on putting some soy-based meat substitution on the market at the same time, and we had really a growth rate at the peak in January. 8% of all what we used to sell in what's it called, hakkekød, what's that called, ground meat, yeah, was actually minced beef was actually replaced by that product, and now it's down to a tenth of that. So it was a rapid growth, and quite a rapid decline as well. But I hope that it will stay, and where it stays is, I agree, along the millennials.